Hello, everybody. I'm Seth Weissman, and welcome to another episode of Safe Real Estate. Today, I want to talk about the broker compensation agreement, Form F259. And I've had a couple of people say to me, well, gosh, they think that form is complicated, and is there not an easier way to preserve the amount of compensation being paid for by the seller or seller's broker towards the buyer broker's compensation? And the answer is there's nothing magic at all about using the broker compensation agreement. And as far as I'm concerned, you can use that agreement or you can use a special stipulation. The problem is this: if you're going to use a special stipulation, you absolutely want to make sure that that special stipulation does three things. And here they are. Number one, it needs to say that the special stipulation, once the contract is signed, cannot be modified or amended without the prior written consent of the broker. Because you have to remember, the brokers are not a party to the purchase and sale agreement. And what we don't want is for the parties to agree to pay the buyer broker's compensation in a certain amount, and for the buyer and seller to then change that amount, as in lower that amount, and leave the buyer broker in a position where they're not getting what they thought they would be getting. So again, you absolutely want to make sure that the special stip says this cannot be changed without the buyer broker's consent. Number two, the special stipulation needs to say that the broker, the buyer's broker, is an express third-party beneficiary of the purchase and sale agreement for the purpose of enforcing this compensation special stipulation. Because again, since we're not a party to the contract, under contract law, we normally would not have a right to enforce any provision in the contract unless the contract says we are express third-party beneficiaries. And third and finally, the special stipulation needs to say that this stip survives the closing in the event that the buyer broker's compensation is not paid at the closing. Because if a party shows up at the closing and says, gosh, I don't have any money to pay you your commission or your compensation, and the deal closes anyway because you're kind-hearted, what you don't want to have happen is for the buyer broker to then go to court and have the judge say, sorry, you did not say that this provision survived the closing, so this provision and the rest of the contract went away once the transaction was closed. And for your benefit, I have written a special stipulation that fulfills all three of these requirements. And what it says is as follows: for and in consideration of buyer's broker having procured the buyer to purchase the property, seller agrees to pay buyer's broker at the closing the following compensation. And then you would write in the compensation amount. This special stipulation can only be modified with the prior written consent of seller and buyer's broker, and any attempt to modify the same shall be null and void. Buyer's broker shall be an express third-party beneficiary of this agreement to enforce its rights to the compensation above. This special stipulation shall survive the closing if the compensation is not paid in full at closing. So in other words, gang, you now have two different ways to protect your rights to compensation. You can use the broker compensation agreement, which will soon be called the Buyer-Broker Compensation Agreement, or you can use a special Stip. Either one of them should work. I hope this episode of Safe Real Estate has been beneficial. As always, it's great to see everybody. Please continue to tune in. Bye now.